The world apparently officially ended on March 9th, 2041. So, got less than 20 years to go, guys. Great news. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I am reviewing the classic sci-fi book Rite of Passage by Alexei Panshin. This is a classic sci-fi from 1968, and I know what you're thinking. You are distracted by my hat. And that's fine. This hat is probably one of the worst hats I've ever seen, but I absolutely love it because this hat angers people, and that's why I wear it. This was actually a real corporation in Ontario back in like the 90s or 80s, whenever this hat came into existence. It's called just called Mining Corporation. I bought this hat at a beach store that just had these bins of baseball hats and other hats because I was at the beach and I needed a hat because I forgot mine, etc., etc. And I bought this one because it's just terrible and I love it. It's like too big. It's got like the mesh. It's like the ultimate trucker hat. Anyway, I'm wearing it because I tried to do something with my hair and I don't know what happened. So today I'm not looking the best. But you know what? That's fine. I'm going on vacation next week. So I will come back probably sunburnt. And yeah, actually this video is going to be scheduled to be posted when I'm on vacation. So yes, next week you'll see. Anyway, what am I doing with this? I am doing one of my typical classic sci-fi reviews where I go through the review itself. It has no spoilers. Then I'm going to do a deep dive into some interesting facets of the novel. This book, Rite of Passage. I found this book at a used bookstore, obviously. This book is so much fun. The great thing about like pre-YA book world or book era, I guess, is that there existed these books for adults that older kids could read and understand, but didn't contain the often insufferable aspects of YA today. Chosen one teenagers in general, love triangles, school-based settings, the stuff that I'm just not interested in. I'm not saying that these things are bad. They're just like tropes of that genre that I don't particularly enjoy. I'll probably have to read a lot more of them when my kids get older and start reading them because I'll probably want to read along with them. But, you know, I'm taking my 10 years now to not read any YA whatsoever. Except for this book, which I wouldn't say it's a YA because it existed before that. But it is kind of that because it stars a younger person and it's about growing up. Anyway, had I read this book as an early teen, I likely would have adored it, and I loved it now too. So here's the story. In 2198, after the desperate wars that destroyed Earth, man lives precariously on 100 colony worlds in 7 giant ships that once ferried man to the stars. Young Mia Havero has lived a safe and happy childhood aboard one of these great ships. But now Mia approaches the age of the trial, when children are tested against the hostile wilds of a colony world, to survive or perish. So Mia is a likable character with agency, smarts, and a whole lot of sass. She's stubborn and a bit cocky, but these are traits girls were rarely afforded in novels from 50 years ago. As such, you know, she was this refreshing character for the genre, and I liked her a lot. Did she remind me of me at that age? A bit of a hell on wheels? Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. I would have like totally identified with her when I was a child. The other characters in the book, unfortunately, weren't afforded as much depth, and I didn't really care about them aside from one called Jimmy. And Jimmy was a nice, normal boy. You know, he complimented Mia well in their scenes together, but the story is really all Mia for the most part. The setting is fantastic. It's like a continually moving spaceship hollowed from an asteroid that takes resources from the technologically bereft planets that it colonized. It's a super cool concept. I love the way that society was set up, you know, how it definitely wasn't a utopia, and the structure of the culture had evolved to accommodate their finite ability to grow population-wise. It's really interesting that, like, a lot of thought has been put into how the spaceship functions and how that changed the mindsets and culture of the people on the ship. The plot is very much a Bildungsroman. We follow Mia's journey from childhood to adulthood, about 2 years, I think, and I was very much enthralled with it. I don't need a complex plot to enjoy a story as long as, you know, there's something else there, and that something was Mia. So there were moments of tension, and the actual rite of passage was different than I expected, which was actually kind of nice. Like, Mia herself doesn't change that much in terms of temperament over her 2 years growing up or whatever, but it's interesting to see other parts of her outlook on life and like professional or personal philosophy kind of shift and grow as she gets a bit older. I also very much enjoyed the attack on traditional gender roles. We have to remember that this book came out in 1968. To some people, the ideas in it at the time would have seemed very outlandish and even shocking. I love the diversity aspect of it too. How Mia is not only a girl, but a person of color, and it's clear the ship has outgrown racism and sexism. That was a nice. I like when books do that, especially books from the 60s. Overall, I really enjoy this book, and I will share it with my daughter when she's old enough, so I'm going to save it even though it's really beat up. I do have to say, though, I was reading this book the other day, and my husband looked over and he's like, who's that sexy dame? And I was like, first of all, sexy dame, are you from the 30s? And second of all, I'm like, she's 14. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I know. There's no way. There's no way this girl is 14. Give me a break. She's like 25. But yeah, also those sandals, well, those are not practical. Anyway, definitely a weird choice. Maybe it was a way to convince adults to read the book, maybe. Anyway, I just thought that was funny. Okay, now I'm going to move into my deep dive. I'm not going to talk about the tech like I usually do because there really isn't anything else like that interesting aside from the ship that I already mentioned. Like there isn't too much kind of outlandish technology. Like there's signals, which are just like little GPS devices, and like sonic blasters, which are just guns basically that shoot some kind of sonic beam. But yeah, nothing super interesting about that. So I'm going to talk about though is world building, population control, some social issues, and the depiction of Mia. So the world building. As you heard from the back cover, the world was destroyed due to overpopulation causing tons of wars. To escape, they were put on these great ships, and there were 112 colony planets. Now there's down to... How many were there down to now? Like 99 or something like that, because they had to get rid of some of them. The world apparently officially ended on March 9th, 2041. So got less than 20 years to go, guys. Great news. So it was interesting how the ship was a little stagnated in its growth. So they have these like useless jobs, like Jimmy and Mia want to be an ornithologist and a synthesist, and an ornithologist is someone who tidies up a space, and the synthesist is like a decorator who reorganizes it. How is this a full-time job in a ship that where everyone lives in the same little tiny apartment? I don't know. I think that these are busy jobs because most of the stuff on the ship is automated. And because their resources are limited and their space is limited, they can't really experiment or grow. They just reorganize all the time. So they are very stagnated in that regard. Like people have been living the same way for like 100 years. People live in small apartments, and because they live so long, childbearing and rearing is a lot different. Kids live in a dormitory until they're old enough to move in with a parent or with both parents. They also can choose to stay in the dorm if they wish. They can pick which parent to live with if the parents aren't together. The kids are afforded a lot of freedom, which was actually nice to see. It reminded me of like what it was like when I was younger growing up. It blows my mind now that parents like pick their kids up from school and their kids are like 12 years old. I'm like, what? I'm like, at 12 years old, I was babysitting other kids. At 8 years old, I was like going to the mall on the bus by myself. And yeah, things might be a little more dangerous now, but are they really? Or are we just more aware of the dangers? Or are the dangers like put into our heads more because we have so much access to social media and the news and things like that? Anyway, speaking of kids, another theme of the book is population control. And part of this has to do with the trial. So what is the trial? When the kids turn 14, they are sent down to a planet to survive for 1 month. Yeah. If they don't meet their rendezvous at a certain time, like they have a signal, the GPS thing, to call the ship down on that day, if they don't signal and they don't get picked up, they are left there or they presume to be dead. Condemning 14-year-olds to not only possible death, but abandoning them on a hostile or at least backwater planet is such a harsh and interesting method of population control. It gets so random. It's more interesting actually when you learn that they are being sent to populated areas. I thought, given the back cover, I thought it was like survival, like in the woods, like their Bear Grylls around, drinking their own piss and stuff like that. And there's even training in the book where they go and like they go to a planet as a group and they build a cabin and they fight a tiger, and that was kind of problematic. They like chase a tiger down and kill it with knives. I'm like, this is not cool. Anyway, they have that kind of training, so I assumed that they'd be put on some kind of barren planet, but no, they have to contend with people. And these people, they call them, like colloquially, they call them mud eaters. That's an insult, but usually people just call them colons, like colonists or colons, I guess. I don't know. Just call them people. they had to contend with these colonists who don't really like them, because the colonists are aware of them because they come down on their big spaceships and they also trade with them and like demand trades and things like that. So the colonists don't like these kids. Anyway, presumably most of the kids left behind didn't die, but they had their, maybe their signal machines were broken, or maybe they chose to stay. Who knows? We don't actually get to find out. I do wonder how many of them, with their education, because they are, it's not like they don't have any. I wonder how many managed to like make a name for themselves in the planet they're left on, or if they just struggled to survive and became beggars or something. I don't know. We don't really know, and that's kind of the interesting thing about it. Actually, we're in the same kind of mindset as the parents and the other kids going to the trial. They just don't know. So another really interesting facet about population control in this novel is the population control on the ship itself. So they have very strict rules for having kids, but these rules, while they are kind of black and white, the situations are handled on a case-by-case basis. So for example, there's a woman who had 4 kids and they all died in the trial, or whatever, stayed on the planet. And so she went and she illegally got pregnant with another baby. So there was this whole meeting to discuss what to do with her. This is where it gets really interesting. So forcing someone to have an abortion is just as much of an affront to human rights as forcing someone to carry a fetus to term, in my opinion. As such, it seems at first like the ship still doesn't understand reproductive justice or bodily autonomy, which I thought was kind of a contradiction in terms of how equal the society was on the ship. But I guess the issue is like, what is the answer to this woman's action? Like, how do you maintain control of such a system if you forgive people for a pretty egregious crime? So what they do is they exile her to a colony planet once she has the baby. To me, that seemed like a logical answer, and one she should have expected. It sucks, but if the ship were tolerant of everybody who broke the rules, their very existence would be at risk. It's utilitarianism, and a thing that Mia wrestles with later in the novel. And it's not like she got pregnant by accident. That would be a different story. She deliberately circumvented the birth control methods in order to have another kid. And, the problem, though, is the trial. Like, the trial was the issue. There should be a rule that but the problem is that they make certain rules. I guess that's the thing. It's really complicated, and I find this extremely fascinating that he managed to work this out in the book. It does raise another issue of whether it is right for the society to not allow her to get pregnant, as that's also her choice, because it's also her body. But given the very specific situation they're in, like, they're on a spaceship that can only handle so many people, why does she get special treatment? It seems justified to me that they have a strict birth control policy, just as they aren't allowed to do other things on the ship that could jeopardize the entire ship. I just think it's a really fascinating question, and it was so neat to kind of get to read about it. There are some social issues in the book that are brought up. Some of these are just funny. I'm going to read one of them. This one's about wealth and the accumulation of stuff. We have such a small society on the ship that buying and selling aren't really practicable. If you want something, you can put in a requisition for it, and in a little while it comes. You can live as simply or as lavishly as you want. There's a limit as to how much you can jam into one apartment, though some people do live it up to the limit. In a society where everybody can have just about anything he wants, there's no real prestige in having things unless you use them to get some aesthetic pleasure from them. So I would say the tendency in general is towards simple living. I thought that was really interesting, and it does make sense. And I wonder, would humans be like that in a real situation, or would they like covet other people's stuff? Because like, if you didn't have, if people were all stuck in the same situation, would there be the same fights over things like land? I don't know. It's interesting. There's a really good takedown on racism and xenophobia in here. Well, it's my personal opinion that saying the colons stink is simply a self-justifying myth invented to make us feel morally superior and absolutely in the right. Your statement is likely to keep me from listening to any valid arguments that you might actually have. That certainly wouldn't do you any good. I thought that was kind of funny. And there's a really interesting quote about maturity. So, maturity is the ability to sort the portions of truth from the accepted lies and self-deceptions that you have grown up with. It is easy now to see the irrelevance of the religious wars of the past, to see that capitalism in itself is not evil, to see that honor is most often a silly thing to kill a man for, to see that national patriotism should have meant nothing in the 21st century, to see that a correctly arranged tie has very little to do with true social worth. It is harder to assess critically the insanities of your own time, especially if you have accepted them unquestionably for as long as you can remember, for as long as you have been alive. If you never make the attempt, whatever else you are not mature. I thought that was a really interesting and quite cutting comment. It's like, ooh, Alexei, geez, getting all political up in here. Yeah, the book is also very sex positive. So there is this sex scene between two 14-year-olds. It's not like a sex scene, and like it's not like hyper-sexualized sex scene in that way, but it happens, and unlike even some books today, the girl suffers nothing socially from it. The experience for both of them wasn't some transformative thing, nor was it something either felt shame for, which is what it should be. Granted, they come from a society where STIs and accidental pregnancy are non-issues, but imagine if we had that too. Like, would sex shaming go away? I don't know. Is sex shaming just a product of patriarchy? Perhaps. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that was actually a great thing to have younger readers see, especially in the 60s. Oh my God. So this ties into Mia herself. So this book is fabulous for its depictions of women. The only thing I'll say is that they use the word man rather than some gender neutral term, like throughout. I mean, it was used twice in the back blurb, but that's minor. It is 1968. I mean, this book predates the moon landing. Mia is not only a girl, but a person of color. She's both Spanish and Indian, as she says, but they don't specify whether that means like Latina Spanish, like South American Spanish, or Spain Spanish, and they don't say if that's indigenous or Indian. Like, I have no idea. They don't really specify. But anyway, anyone of mixed race, let alone two people of color, mixed race, is not very common in a protagonist, so that was a great thing to see, especially from a book of this age and this genre. Likewise, not only is Mia a girl, but the novel goes out of its way to put Mia in a sexist society where she's bewildered by the small sexism that she sees. Like, she's on the one planet she goes to. Like, girls are forced to wear dresses, and they're not allowed to be part of the police force. They're not allowed to go out on their own. All these little things. Where the ship, in contrast, has women in positions of power, and Mia is not treated any differently from the boys, especially in the survival class. It was great. It was a great way to kind of poke fun at sexism, to say this is stupid, and Mia's kind of reaction to it, like, this is crazy. Well, that's how I feel about it. The book also mentions periods twice, which is virtually unheard of in books that aren't by like Beverly Cleary or like books intended to help girls deal with periods. So I thought that was really interesting and great. I guess, that's kind of it. Overall, the only thing I'd say is wrong with the novel is this sentence. Reading old novels isn't much use for anything. Excuse me? What?